This is Jack Moelmann, and today is Monday, April 23rd, 2012. We're here once again in my home in O'Fallon, Illinois, which is close to St. Louis, and the occasion of a mini convention held by the St. Louis Theater Organ Society, and the headlining organist is with us today. His name is Stephen Ball, who hails from Ann Arbor, Michigan, in that particular area. And anyway, Steve, we're glad to have you, and I think we'll get an opportunity to find out what you've been doing in the world of music and theater organ, and we'll just go from there. So, number one question is, how did you get started in music?
Well, I think music found me before I found it. I was deeply intrigued by the sound of the pipe organ. I remember very clearly from a young age, I think before my conscious memory starts, so before the age of 2, being fascinated by the sound of the organ. And we had a keyboard at the house, we had a little Lowry organ, and I remember that whatever I heard in church, I could always play on the organ at home. So my parents knew almost immediately that they should begin trying to entice me into almost any other profession they could think of than music. They didn't succeed, but it was an interesting experience growing up in a house where there were no other musicians. So I really had to find my own way, and began piano lessons when I was 6 years old, and learned to read music. Was playing in church when I was 9. And absolutely determined right through all of my education until high school to pursue organ performance, which is what my major was as an undergraduate.
Now, this is primarily at this point in our talk classical, or had you been introduced to the theater organ and popular organ?
I had been introduced to the theater organ. I think it's safe to say I was interested in anything so long as it was organ related. My first experience with the theater organ was at a restaurant, pizza restaurant called Good Time Charlie's in Grand Rapids, and Charlie Balo let me play the organ there on my birthday, which is an experience I will never forget. It's the first time I ever touched a theater organ, and it was a sort of a tradition in my house. My parents would let me go to Good Time Charlie's once a year on my birthday, and that was how we celebrated. So,
Well, over time you've studied, and you're probably one of the most highly educated people in the theater organ circuit today, because you have a PhD in
organ performance. Technically in music degree land, they call it a DMA, a Doctorate in Musical Arts. But it's true, and I think it may be easy to misunderstand why to go to all the trouble to get a doctorate. I mean, the organ's a very old instrument, and in academia, when you study something and get a terminal degree in music, you know, the real point of doing that is so that you can teach in a university. The organ I describe to people as being a very old tree with many different branches. And the theater organ is one branch on the tree. You know, it's the same as the organs of Bach's time, you know, being 18th century German organs, or César Franck's time being 19th century organs. The theater organ is a dialect of a very large and wonderful language. And so going to all the trouble to get a doctorate in organ is also a way of bringing the theater organ for the first time to academia, which I think previous to this had been pretty resistant to the thought of American popular music being played on the organ, or even understanding how a film score could be accompanied on an organ. So the arrival of the theater organ to academia is really a very recent thing, and I hope that I've been able to support that in some way.
Okay, now what is it that you do these days in your university work? You describe what you do in day to day rather than just performing.
I wear a lot of hats.
You're a professor, or you're a
professor of music. So I'm in the organ department at the University of Michigan. I teach carillon performance, campanology, which is the sort of the science of the acoustics of bells and bell ringing. I teach organ if I'm called upon to do that. I also teach engineering. So we have a course that we've started in bell founding, where we make objects and study their acoustical design. We're also talking about extending that to organ building. I'm the director of the Stearns Collection of Musical Instruments, which is one of the world's largest collections of musical instruments. We have all sorts of things, including a lovely little 4-rank Robert Morton theater organ. And in addition to that, I'm the University Carillionaire. So the carillon is a set of tuned tower bells, and my job is to play the carillon for all major university functions. And it's interesting that the carillon and the theater organ both have something in common in that they're public musical instruments. And my mind is always fascinated with mechanical things and with musical things and these very public musical instruments. So the carillon and the theater organ are cousins in a way.
Yeah, but I was just thinking, the theater organ, you have to get people inside. The carillon, they can't get away from it being outside.
That's true, unless of course you're at someplace like the Roosevelt Park in L.A.
Yeah, but I just thought about it. You have a captive audience inside a theater. You can lock the doors and they can't leave. But
That's
here
true.
you're entertaining people in whatever the carillon's surroundings happen to be.
That's true. Although with the theater organ, you're a moving target, which I've always told the kids at the theater that a moving target is harder to hit. But on the other hand, I suppose throwing a tomato up 120 feet is that's a remarkably good aim as well.
Now I read somewhere that you did a carillon part of a silent movie.
Yeah, that's true.
How did that work, or what was it?
Well, we did the first silent film ever accompanied by carillon was Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I thought was an appropriate film considering the subject matter. We did that at the University of Michigan for the Summer Festival a couple of years ago. We had about 2,000 people out on the lawn, and they experienced the silent film, most of them for the first time, accompanied by a carillon. And just this past summer, we also did that again with the Guild of Carillionaires. We had a large audience of carillionaires, and again with the Summer Festival, we did Phantom of the Opera, and I had a good friend of mine, Juliet Peters, singing parts of Gounod's Faust, which is a large part of that film.
As part of your museum, I observed you're sort of fascinated with this musical treasure that I have in my house here called the Optagon.
Oh yes, well we like all sorts of obscurities.
Tell them what that is.
Well, the Optagon is an electrophone, which is to say a musical instrument which produces its sound by electricity in some way, and it is a fixed pitch instrument insofar as it has keys, and produces its sound by shooting a beam of light through a rotating disc in the interior of the instrument, and one can vary the speed of the disc to produce a sharpening or flattening of pitch. It's essentially an organ that works on the principle that a movie soundtrack works. So a beam of light shooting through a film.
Well, I hope you come and get it sometime.
Well, indeed I will. That'll be my next excuse to be in St. Louis.
Actually, just for the people, it was actually built around the 1970s by the Mattel company. And Optagon means optical organ.
I think it'll be a good complement to our other electric instruments. we have a theremin, and we have a Moog synthesizer. The collection actually has Opus 1, the first Moog synthesizer ever built. And there's a mellotron and all sorts of other odds and ends out there that are quite fascinating. In fact, our theremin, by the way, if you don't know what a theremin is one of the few instruments that you play by not touching it. You suspend your hands above it, one hand being pitch and the other being volume. Our theremin was used at WXYZ in Detroit and was the sound of the Green Hornet. So when you hear the radio program The Green Hornet, that introduction, the sound of the buzzing hornet, is actually the theremin that's part of the University of Michigan Stearns Collection.
So you're a performer on that.
Well, I've been known to demonstrate it. I don't know if I'm an actual performer.
The one most notable that I know of is Dennis James, and he one of the experts on the theremin.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's interesting because I found out in my research with the
Sorry
theater
for the interruption, but the dog seems to be trying to get in on this.
Well, I have dogs at home, so this is just par for the course.
Well, in your tell us about your concerts and theater organ primarily. I mean, are you out and around and playing all over the world, and where have you been? What's probably the most exciting one you've ever done?
Exciting. Well, the definition of excitement would be what kind of excitement, good or
Well,
bad.
in terms of the instrument, the audience, the whole situation.
Well, I think the silent films for Carillon have proven to be the most exciting, insofar as there's no way to actually rehearse it. You have the concept for the score, you can practice on the Carillon, but there's no way to actually run the film with the Carillon, having it projected, and seeing the audience reaction until you actually do it. Other really exciting shows, let's see, I did a concert tour of the Netherlands a couple of years ago, and was interviewed on Dutch national radio in Dutch on stage, and had to provide something like a coherent answer in Dutch on stage as part of the concert.
You
That
speak Dutch?
Ja, ik spreek een beetje Nederlands. I speak a little Dutch,
Oh.
enough to hopefully be believable on Dutch radio. But that was certainly an exciting show, and also being able to play films in Europe. Silent films, as we understand them here in America, are not frequently presented in Europe because for the most part, the motion picture palaces have disappeared. And here in the United States, we still have several very good examples, like the Fox, where you have these spectacular organs in original motion picture houses. So presenting silent film in Europe always is a unique and challenging experience, because people have to be reminded of the origins of film accompaniment and how silent pictures were first accompanied.
Well, if you were to classify yourself, would you, as a concert organist playing the organ primarily, or silent movies, or a classical organist, or where would you find your niche in life? I see your page, or pro card they call it, in the Theater Organ magazine. You say at the top, silent films. Where do you identify yourself in some particular niche, or maybe it's just all of them?
I think I take Marcel Dubray's approach in that you try to do everything well, because you try to understand the whole approach to everything. You know, to be a good classical organist means you have to have good technique. That helps you be a good theater organist, which helps you interpret popular song. You know, understanding how popular music is interpreted on the organ, you understand good phrasing and good musicality. And you have to be a good film player. Film is the origin of the instrument. You know, the theater organ really evolves in this world of early cinema. If I had to choose one, I think it probably would be as a film accompanist, because I find myself never happier than at the bottom of the orchestra pit accompanying the pictures. There's just an electricity there, and there's a magic there.
And a sore neck.
Well, yeah, I suppose depending on which way your neck is turning or how far up you have to look. But, you know, the reason why I do any of this sort of music making, the reason to play the theater organ, or to accompany the pictures, or to be a part of this culture, it's for the magic of it. And there's a certain electricity with silent film that it's inspiring. I love it so very much.
Now, do you get in the mechanical end of this, the technician side of it? Do you build them, fix them? Maybe out of desperation you have to on occasion. But
yes, if you want to play a program, sometimes things aren't working. I'm fairly involved in the mechanics. I don't build them. My primary focus has been in restoration. although I don't make a profession of it, at least not a full-time profession of it, because I don't really have the time to do that and work for the university and museum and perform. But I think in order to understand the evolution of the instrument, in order to be able to push the musical boundaries, you must understand where the mechanical limits are. So any instrument that stops evolving dies. The subject of the study of how instruments evolve is called organology. It's a primary component of my work with the Museum of Musical Instruments. I'm an organologist. And you find that art always exists on the envelope. So art is always pushing forwards. So my study of the mechanics of the pipe organ, and my ability to restore them for that matter, is not only an appreciation for the history of the instrument and its technological progression and what was possible with each musical evolution of the instrument, but it's also a way of looking into the future, where things are going, the future evolution of the instrument. So yes, I'm deeply involved in the technical stuff, and for a number of different reasons, other than just the practical reason of I've been called to play on an instrument and something's not working. Yes, so.
Well, we talked about exciting programs. What would be what is a program that you did that you hope you never have to repeat? It was just turned out to be a disaster, and things happen now and then, either because the audience was bad, the traffic, you got there late, the organ quit in the middle of it. Do you have any recollection of something you'd hope would never repeat itself?
Of horror stories? Well, I think one of the memorable performance, which is always there is no business like show business, and the show must go on. And so what comes to mind of those performances where the show couldn't go on, and I had one in particular, which is the first time I played the organ at Longwood Gardens, which also happened to be the first time that the organ was ever publicly presented after the restoration project. So really there was only about a third of the organ working, and frankly it was the softer third, which was plenty for the ballroom. But it was for the Guild of Carillionaires convention, which was meeting at Longwood Gardens that year. And they showed the film The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which was an appropriate subject matter for a guild of bell ringers. And the ballroom was packed, everybody was very excited, the organ builders were there. It was the first time the organ had been used publicly in 7 years. And frankly, the organ was flawless. The film score was very interesting. It used all sorts of music from the carillon repertoire, so it was very engaging for the bell ringers. But in the middle of the performance, the fire alarm went off, and there was no way to cover it. We had to stop the show in order for everyone to go outside, so we had a very unplanned intermission. But I think that was a performance I'd never like to repeat, because it was it was so nerve-jarring in the middle of a show to have the fire alarm go off. And then immediately the concern there was that the fire suppression system in the organ would start going off, because there was a nitrogen-based sprinkler system. So we were all, it was an exciting 20 minutes, I'll put it that way.
Okay. Well, we're going to sort of bring this somewhat to a close with maybe the following bit of information that you might be able to provide to young people, to anybody that might want to venture into the music world as a performer, what they might even think about as being a good listener, or even a technician. What would advice, especially since you're in the education business, let's take the performance part of it. Somebody that just thinks the organ, let's take the organ as an instrument, sounds interesting. What would be your advice as to what they ought to do to get into it?
To get into it.
I
think my advice for everyone in all of those categories is do all things with the greatest of integrity. Don't go halfway. One should pursue one's path in life for love of it. Do that and everything else will follow. For performers today, the organ is an ancient instrument. It's 2,500 years old, or maybe even older. The instrument must continue to evolve to remain relevant socially and musically. And I think we're in an age where suddenly music production has become industrial. It's like the last point of arrival of the train of the Industrial Revolution.
Sorry for that interruption, but local phone call. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, the music is sort of the point I made was that music is sort of like being industrially produced now. It comes from speakers, from lobbies and behind palm trees and in elevators everywhere. And people forget that music making is something which it's one of the most deeply defined elements of being human. We make music for reasons that are very deep and very ancient. And the organ is one of the most ancient of instruments and most powerful and stirring. And the reasons to do this, that all comes from in here. So I would say advice for performers: do it for the love of it. The organ will speak to you. If it does, then you know this is what to do with it. For technicians, respect what our forefathers have done. Don't impose your vision upon them, and respect where they've been, but never fail to question the direction of the future of the instrument, because of course the instrument must continue to evolve to stay relevant. And have fun with it, because that's what it's really all about.
That's good. We're trying to capture the history of the theater organ, and that's the main focus of this is the theater organ, even though there's the classical organ. Through archives and documenting this, how do we inspire people to be interested in the history of this thing?
Well, I mean, how can you? That's an interesting question. What is the theater organ? I mean, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach is an organist who most of us consider to be classical. And I read an interesting letter that he wrote one day saying, I heard a fascinating thing the other day. I heard a piece of organ music a full 50 years old, which is to say he always heard modern music. Handel's organ concertos were written for an organ in a theater. Theaters have had organs for hundreds of years. And what we consider the organ, I think, the theater organ in our day and age is really the ability of an instrument to interpret popular music.
Mm-hmm.
That's automatically tied in with the fact that the organ is a fixed pitch instrument. Yet, the unique characteristic of the theater organ is its ability to trick the ear into thinking it is not a fixed pitch instrument. It is able to suggest lyricism and melodicism and even pitch drift, which really the organ can't do. C and C sharp are different notes. You can't slide between them. But the theater organ accomplishes this by the tremulant on the tibia clausa. You can suggest this lyrical, soprano falling onto a pitch. And by creating all these orchestral sounds, the theater organ is really what happens if you take a romantic instrument and push the colors of the instrument to their very extremes. Make the flutes as fluty as possible and the diapasons as, and the reeds and diapasons as much in any directions they want to be, either as dark or as bright. It's the ultimate logical endpoint of the development from the symphonic organ of Cavaillé through the orchestral organs that we see in America and in Europe, to finally this last point where the scales and the pressures have blossomed into to the place where they're at their end. The theater organ is the final expression of that continuous musical idea. So I think the way to get people interested in the history of the instrument, rather than trying to segregate into, this little canister of information, this is the theater organ, or this is the orchestral organ, or this is the symphonic organ, is just to step back and acknowledge the fact that if something is beautiful, it's inherently beautiful. It'll be recognized by that. Or if it's culturally relevant, society will do that automatically. We won't need to explain it to them. I think the theater organ and its history are intimately tied with silent film, and for that matter will always remain integral parts of our American culture, because it is the voice of early cinema for the first 40 years. And as a palette of sound, as all organs really are just a palette of color for us to play with, it contains the most unique, vibrant, and brilliant colors. So it will remain perpetually relevant for our artistic expression.
Well, I have to say you've been one of the most colorful people we've had on these talks so far. Very well versed and very intense about what you believe, and I think that's very good. We need to sort of bring this to a close. Do you have any final comment you want to make about anything at all, and then we'll close it down?
I want to express my gratitude to the people who love this instrument so dearly, and for those people who I've been able to touch, or those places like the Fox that you can catch the perfume of the excitement of this incredible art. It's a uniquely American art and musical voice, and I couldn't sum it up any better than to say, long live the magic of this instrument.
And of course, the Fox you're talking about is the Fox Theater here in St. Louis, which you put on a program this morning for all of us. So we're going to close this down and thank Dr. Stephen Ball.
But you can call me Steve, just so you know.
Just plain Steve. From around Ann Arbor, Michigan. This is Monday, the 23rd of April, 2012. O'Fallon, Illinois, which is near the Fox Theater. And we thank you, Steve, for being here. This is Jack Moelmann, and we'll see you all at the next one of these discussions.
Sounds good.